The day Jonah walked into her café with his new girlfriend on his arm, Serena didn't drop a single cup. That was the part she'd replay later, lying awake in the dark with Maisie's soft breathing coming through the baby monitor. She hadn't dropped a single cup. She'd smiled, taken their order, oat milk latte for him, vanilla chai for the woman with the perfect blowout and the ring that caught the light every time she moved her hand, and she'd said enjoy, the way she always did, the way her staff said it, the way the word had become muscle memory over 4 years of running groundwork on the corner of Elgin and Fifth. Jonah had looked at her the way people look at someone they used to know and have since filed away. Politely, briefly, with the particular blankness of a man who has already rewritten the story of what happened between them and arrived at a version where he was fine. "Nice place," he said. "Thanks," she said. That was all. She went back behind the bar and kept working, kept steaming milk and calling names and wiping down the counter, and it wasn't until her barista Priya touched her arm at 11:15 and said, "Serena, your hands are shaking," that she realized they were. She'd opened groundwork the year after Maisie was born, which everyone in her life had agreed was either the bravest or most reckless thing she'd ever done, depending on who you asked. Her mother thought both. Her brother thought she was punishing herself. Her landlord had simply handed her the keys and said good luck with the weary sincerity of a man who'd seen too many optimists sign leases. But she'd needed something that was hers. After Jonah left, after the conversation in their kitchen, where he'd said, "I don't think I'm cut out for this," and gestured vaguely at her, at the apartment, at the 3-week-old baby asleep in the next room, she'd needed something she could build with her own hands and be certain of. A place that would still be there in the morning. Maisie was 4 now. She called the Café Mama's Coffee House and had strong opinions about the cinnamon rolls. Serena had built something real. She knew that. She just hadn't expected it to hurt so much, seeing Jonah sit down at table 6 like a customer, like a stranger, like a man who had never held her daughter in a hospital room and said she's perfect before disappearing 6 weeks later, with 2 suitcases and a forwarding address in Vancouver. She hadn't expected to feel small again, after 4 years of practicing not feeling small. The man came in on a Tuesday. Serena noticed him the way you notice weather, not because you're looking, but because something in the room changed. He was tall and dressed quietly, the kind of clothes that cost more than they look like they cost, and he sat at the counter instead of a table, which was unusual. Most people who looked like him sat at tables by the window and took calls. He ordered a black coffee and didn't look at his phone. "You just passing through?" Priya asked him, because Priya asked everyone everything, which was either her greatest flaw or her greatest asset, depending on the shift. "Not sure yet," he said. His name was Adrian. He told her that on the 3rd visit, when Serena was the one who refilled his cup, and he said thank you, and then, after a pause that felt deliberate, "I'm Adrian." "Serena," she said. "I know, it's on the board." She looked. It was. Serena's pick of the week. Notes of dark cherry and brown sugar. She'd forgotten she'd put her name on it. "Good catch," she said. He almost smiled. Not quite. Just the suggestion of one, at the corner of his mouth, like he was considering it and hadn't decided. He came back Thursday. Then the following Monday. Then every few days after that, with the quiet consistency of someone who had made a decision and wasn't revisiting it. He tipped well and didn't make conversation unless she started it, and he had a way of sitting very still that she found, against her better judgment, oddly calming. She didn't ask what he did. She'd learned not to ask that question too early in Halifax. Everyone was either in finance, government, or fishing, and 2 of those 3 led to long explanations she didn't have time for before the morning rush. She asked instead what he was reading, one afternoon in February, when the street outside was gray slush, and he had a paperback face down on the counter. He held it up, Cormac McCarthy. "No Country for Old Men." "Heavy," she said. "The good ones usually are." That was the longest conversation they'd had. She thought about it more than she should have, later, putting Maisie to bed and listening to her daughter explain, with great seriousness, why her stuffed rabbit needed his own pillow. Jonah came back in March, without the girlfriend this time. He sat at table 6 again, like he was compelled to it, and he waited until the after-lunch lull to wave her over. Serena considered pretending she didn't see him. She considered a lot of things in the 2 seconds it took her to cross the room. "Hey," he said. "Do you have a minute?" "Not really," she said. "But go ahead." He looked uncomfortable. Good, some part of her thought. The other part was already tired. "I heard you're doing really well," he said. "This place." Maisie. He said her daughter's name like he was testing the weight of it. "I've been thinking about reaching out." "You have my number," Serena said. "You've always had it. I know, I just—" He stopped, ran a hand through his hair. "I didn't know how." She looked at him, the same face she'd once thought she'd look at for the rest of her life. Older now, softer around the jaw. He looked like a man who had done something he wasn't proud of and had spent 4 years finding comfortable ways to frame it. "Jonah," she said, and her voice was very level, which surprised her. "She's 4. She doesn't know who you are. If you want to be in her life now, that's a conversation I'm willing to have for her sake, not yours. But I'm not going to do it in my cafe during business hours. Email me." She went back to the counter. Her hands weren't shaking. Behind her, she heard him put money on the table and leave. She didn't tell anyone about it. Not her mother, not her brother, not Priya, who would have had 14 opinions and led a one-woman tribunal by the end of the week. She held it inside and let it settle the way you let sediment settle in water until you can see clearly again. It was Adrian who noticed something was off. He came in on a Wednesday, unusual. He was typically a Monday-Thursday, and he sat at the counter and watched her for a while before he said simply, "Rough week? Is it that obvious?" "No, I just pay attention." She looked at him. He was looking back at her with the same calm he always had. No curiosity in it, no tension. The real kind. "An old situation resurfaced," she said. "I handled it. I just haven't figured out where to put it yet." He nodded slowly. "Some things don't go anywhere. You just carry them differently over time." She didn't know what to say to that. It was either the wisest thing anyone had said to her all month, or it was a line, and she'd lost the ability to tell the difference years ago. "You're very zen for someone who reads Cormac McCarthy," she said. That got the actual smile. Full this time. It was a good smile, which was somehow annoying. "Don't tell anyone," he said. "It'll ruin my image." She laughed. It surprised her, the ease of it, the way it came without effort. She couldn't remember the last time she'd laughed like that in her own cafe, in front of someone she didn't already know. She found out by accident. Priya came in one morning in late March holding her phone like it was evidence and said, "Okay, I have to tell you something and you're not allowed to be weird about it." "I'm always weird about things," Serena said. "Fair, okay." Priya held out the phone. It was a news article. Local business section of the Chronicle. A photo of a man in a boardroom taken from a slight distance, very clearly not posing. The caption read, "Adrian Voss, CEO of Voss Capital Group, confirmed as lead investor in Harbor East redevelopment project." Serena stared at it. Adrian Voss. The man who sat at her counter and drank black coffee and read McCarthy and tipped 20% and asked rough week, with the quiet focus of someone who actually wanted to know. That Adrian. "He's been coming in here for 2 months, Priya said. "He's worth," I Googled it, like, a lot. A significant amount of money. "I can see that," Serena said. "Are you going to be weird about it?" Serena handed the phone back. She thought about the way he sat. The way he'd said, "I just pay attention." The way the conversation had felt, somehow, completely ordinary. No performance in it. No weight of impression management. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. He came in the next Monday and she said nothing about it. She made his coffee, he read his book, Thomas Hardy this time, which felt like a clue, and she told herself that it didn't change anything because it didn't have to. But the city had a way of filling in blanks once you started looking. She saw his name attached to a waterfront project she'd been following for years, something that would bring 300 jobs to the North End. She heard the Ellisons at Table 4 mention Voss Capital and describe Adrian as intense but fair, which from Gordon Ellison, who had been in Halifax real estate for 30 years, was high praise. He wasn't what she'd assumed rich men to be. She'd assumed, from her limited sample size, that they were performing at all times, that they wanted the room to know. Adrian seemed actively uninterested in the room knowing. She asked him, on a Thursday in April, while the cafe was almost empty, and the rain against the window made the whole place feel smaller and closer. Why this place? There are better coffee shops closer to the waterfront. He looked up from his book. Better how? Bigger, nicer view, more convenient to your office. You know where my office is? Priya Googled you. He set the book down. How do you feel about that? I haven't decided, she said. I'm asking about the coffee shop. He was quiet for a moment. Then, I walked by here in January. You were opening up alone. It was dark and cold, and you were moving a sign in from the sidewalk, and you were singing something to yourself. I couldn't hear what, and the light inside looked. He paused. Real. That's the only word I have for it. Serena didn't know what to do with that. It sat in her chest like a warm thing. I was probably singing a Paw Patrol song, she said. I have a 4-year-old. Something in his face shifted. Careful, she thought. Not guarded. Careful, like a man doing the math on something and deciding to be honest. I know, he said. You've mentioned her, Maisie, and nothing. I'm just telling you what I saw. Maisie met him by accident. It was a Saturday in May, one of those Halifax Saturdays that comes out of nowhere and makes you forgive the entire winter. Serena had brought Maisie in for a few hours because her sitter canceled and there was inventory to finish. And Maisie had set up camp at the end of the counter with her coloring books and her rabbit and conducted herself like someone who worked there. Adrian came in at noon, which was unusual for a Saturday. Maisie looked up at him with the direct evaluating gaze of a 4-year-old who has learned that adults can be assessed quickly. Hi, she said. Hi, he said. Do you like coffee? I do. Mama says it makes you a morning person even when you're not. She's right. Maisie nodded, apparently satisfied, and returned to her coloring. Adrian sat at the counter. Serena brought his coffee, and he looked at her with something she didn't quite have a name for, and she looked away first because she wasn't ready to name it. She talks a lot, Serena said. I noticed, he said. She's great. Serena wiped down the counter even though it was already clean. Don't do that if you don't mean it. Kids can tell. I mean it, he said simply. She believed him. That was the part that scared her most. Jonah emailed in May. It was politely worded and carefully vague, the email of a man who had consulted someone, a therapist, a friend, a Reddit thread, on how to reopen a door he'd closed badly. He wanted to meet. He wanted to talk about next steps, which was a phrase that made her tired just reading it. He mentioned that he was back in Halifax for the foreseeable future. Serena sat with the email for 2 days. She thought about Maisie, who had recently started asking about fathers in the abstract, unprompted way children ask about things they've noticed other children have. She thought about her own anger, which had quieted over 4 years from a roar to a low, steady pressure she'd learned to live around. She wrote back. She suggested a specific time and a neutral location, not her cafe, and she kept it brief. She did not tell him that it would be okay. She didn't know yet if it would be. She noticed, did not feel as alone as she once would have. She told Adrian about it, not because she'd planned to, but because one afternoon in June, he asked how she was and she was too tired to give the short answer. So she gave the long one. He listened the way he did everything, still present without rushing her. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment and then he said, What do you want? Not for Maisie, not what's right. What do you actually want? No one had asked her that. Not once in 4 years. Everyone had asked what was best for the baby, what the healthy thing was, what she should do. Adrian was asking what she wanted, like that still counted. Like she was still a person whose wants were worth a question. I want him to show up consistently or not at all, she said. I don't want her to be someone he tries and fails. She deserves better than that. Then that's what you ask for, he said. And you hold the line. It's not that simple. No. But you know what you want. That's where it starts. She looked at him for a long time. You're surprisingly easy to talk to for someone who said about 12 words in the first month. I was deciding, he said. Deciding what? He met her eyes. Whether to stay. She didn't ask what that meant. She was afraid she already knew, and she wasn't ready to be right yet. He asked her to dinner in July. He did it simply, without ceremony, finished his coffee, put his book away, looked at her and said, I'd like to take you to dinner, not here. Somewhere you can sit on the other side of the counter. He paused. No pressure. I just wanted to be clear about what I was asking. She thought about all the ways it could go wrong. She had a list, maintained and updated over 4 years, of the ways things could go wrong. She knew better than anyone that a man could look like one thing and be another. She knew that I'm not cut out, for this was said by people who seemed capable and certain until they suddenly weren't. She also thought about the way he'd said she's great about Maisie and the way she'd believed him. Yes, she said, but I need to find a sitter first, so it might take a week. A week is fine, he said. I'm not going anywhere. And she thought, for the first time in a very long time, that she believed that too. The dinner was at a small French place on Barrington that she'd always walked past and never gone into, because it was the kind of restaurant that required an occasion, and she had stopped requiring occasions of herself, somewhere in the blur of the first year with Maisie. He was already there when she arrived, which she noticed because Jonah had always been late. They talked for 3 hours about Halifax in the 90s, which they'd both experienced from different angles. Her in a small house in Fairview, him in a series of very different cities while his father moved for work. About what it meant to build something from scratch versus inherit it. About her grandfather's bakery in Truro that she'd spent every summer in as a child, which was where she first learned that food could be a language. About Maisie's current conviction that rabbits could speak but chose not to, and her very compelling reasoning for this position. He did not talk about money. She noticed that too. When they left, it was raining lightly, and he asked if he could walk her to her car. She said yes. At the parking lot on Sackville, he said, "Thank you. This was the best evening I've had in a long time." "Me too," she said, and meant it. He didn't push for more. He said goodnight with the same deliberateness he did everything, and she drove home, and she sat in the parking garage for 5 minutes before going upstairs, because she needed the quiet to hold what had happened. This ordinary, extraordinary evening before the rest of the world rushed back in. Jonah took Maisie for an afternoon in August, just 2 hours. A park, a juice box, a short loop of the public gardens that Maisie reported on in exhaustive detail. There were ducks. One had a funny hat. It was a leaf, Mama, but it looked like a hat, and Jonah had not known the correct name for a peony, but had tried very hard. Serena had sat in her café and not looked at her phone for 2 hours, which was the hardest thing she'd done since labor. She texted Adrian, which she hadn't planned to do, and said simply, "First handoff happened. Both survived." He wrote back within 5 minutes. "Course you did. How are you?" She smiled at her phone like an idiot, in her own cafe, in front of Priya, who noticed everything. "Okay," Priya said. "What is happening?" "Nothing," Serena said. "That is objectively not a nothing face." "I'm fine." "You're glowing, Serena. You haven't glowed since the espresso machine got upgraded." Serena put her phone away and got back to work. But the smile stayed. She told him about her marriage scare, the year she'd almost said yes to someone who wasn't right for her, at 26, because she'd been tired of explaining to her mother why she was still single. She'd gotten as far as looking at venues before she'd understood, clearly and with the relief of someone surfacing from cold water, that she didn't want the wedding. She wanted to want it. He told her about the business partnership that fell apart badly in his late 20s, the friend who'd been more interested in what Adrian could offer than who Adrian was, and the 2 years it had taken him to stop assuming that was true of everyone. They were on the couch at his place. She'd been there twice now for dinner and had observed that he owned very good furniture and very few decorative objects, which told her something, and the city lights were doing what Halifax city lights do on clear September nights. "You're very trusting for someone who got burned," she said. "I'm selective," he said. "That's different." She thought about the way he'd watched her for a month before saying his name. "You did take a while. You seemed worth taking time over." She looked at him. He was watching her with that steady attention, and she thought, here it is, the thing that keeps happening, the moment where I can choose. "Adrian," she said. "Yeah, I'm scared," she said, "of this. Not of you specifically. She searched for the right word, of needing something." He was quiet. Not the silence of someone who didn't have an answer, but someone who wanted to give her the right one. "I know," he said finally. I'm not going to tell you not to be scared. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't, either. He paused. But I'm asking you to try anyway, because I think we're worth the risk. She looked at the city, then back at him. She knew what happened when people said I'm not cut out for this. She also knew she was starting to know what it looked like when someone was. Okay, she said. He reached over and took her hand and held it and didn't say anything else. And the city was quiet, and Maisie was asleep at her grandmother's, and Serena sat with the strange, unguarded feeling of a woman who had built everything herself and was letting someone sit beside it. She'd spent 4 years becoming someone who didn't need rescue. She hadn't known, until right now, that she could still want company.